In this video, we will integrate a Figma design into WeWeb. If you haven't seen our video on how to break down a design into blocks that you put on a web page, we highly recommend that you start with that first. The purpose of this video is to integrate a design into WeWeb, taking our time to learn web development best practices. By the end of the video, you will be comfortable building a simple layout in WeWeb. We will cover more complex elements and more complex layouts in level 2 of the WeWeb Academy. Okay, so we're in WeWeb and we opened a blank project and we even went further and added a blank page. So we really have absolutely nothing on this page. Looking at our design in Figma, we see that we have a top navigation menu, and then we have another section with a lot of different blocks. So in WeWeb, what we'll do is we'll start by adding the top navigation menu. In order to do this, we will go ahead and click on the add icon here. And in our layout section, we will go ahead and get the nav bar, drag and drop it on the page. We will include the variables because this will help us move faster when we're designing from mobile, to display the mobile menu and also the user profile. And now we have our navigation menu at the top. We recommend that you use the nav bar from the UI kit that is provided by default with WeWeb, because nav bars are notoriously tricky to design properly for tablet and mobile. So we've done that for you. You could of course do it yourself. This will simply save you time. And we will have a dedicated video on responsive design, so don't worry too much about it for now. What we want to do now is just keep this logo and just this profile text, this profile link. So we'll get rid of the rest. Here we can expand everything that's in our nav bar. And what we'll do is we'll just get rid of all the links here because we don't need them. We will keep the container, the links container, because again, when we need to improve our design, maybe later on we will want to add more links. So we want to make sure that we're not breaking the responsiveness of this UI element. We will also get rid of the profile container. Our design doesn't require it, and we will get rid of the primary button. So now we're left with this here, the sum action, and we will right away update it and say profile. In order to do that, all I had to do was to double click on the element on the page. Okay, now in Figma, our text was actually blue. So in Figma, if I click on profile, I can see the color here, which is a blue. It says primary 700. The color is the hexadecimal, it's called code is 1D4ED8. So back on the action, we'll go ahead and change the text color. Now we could have the text color here, just change it here. For example, choose, something red. We could do that. Or we can go ahead and look in our design system. By default, when you create a blank project in WeWeb, you will already have a design system included. And here we have that blue 700. Okay, now let's move on to this big section here. The first thing that we want to do in WeWeb is add a section for this content here. Back in WeWeb, what we could do is we could again click on the little plus icon to open the add panel, or we can press A on our keyboard. And then we'll find the blank section and drag and drop it either on the page directly or in the HTML tree navigator. It's usually more precise to drag and drop it on the navigator, but you can drag and drop it on the page as well. We'll rename it right away. We'll rename it by double clicking on it, and we'll type in content. Now we have this blank section in our WeWeb project. If we go back to Figma, we notice that there's a slight, this is a white background on the top navigation menu, but there's a slight gray here, which we can find here. It's the gray 50 FA. Back in WeWeb, we'll go ahead and make sure that we've selected our section, and we'll go and find the background color and add a color FA. We could actually save this to our design system if we wanted to. So let's do that. Gray 50/50 to match the naming convention, and FA. And that's it. You don't have to save a color to the design system. We recommend that you do if there's a chance that in the future you change branding and you want to make sure that, for example, all the background sections of your main content sections on all the pages are updated to, I don't know, maybe gray 100 instead of gray 50. If you had the hexadecimal code here without linking it to the design system, then you would have to change it on all the pages. Whereas if you have linked it to the design system, you only have to edit the color in your design system. The next thing we'll want to do is add a max width to our content section. What we recommend is switching the max width to boxed and leaving the default 1300 pixels. You could make the default bigger. What this does basically is it says, even on wide screens, I don't want my section to be wider than 1300 pixels. This is helpful because as screens get wider and wider, your design might get stretched and it doesn't look as balanced if on wider screens. So that's the first thing we will do. And there are different schools of thoughts on this, so feel free to experiment and find your own preferred way of building. This is the one that we recommend. The next thing we'll do is we'll want to add a little bit of padding. So padding is the space inside the element, inside the section, that gives a bit of breathing room. So then when we start adding elements, they breathe and it's not just a big block of mess all stuck next to each other. Adding padding to the sides like we're doing here with 40 pixels, this is helpful on small screens. It ensures that when you move to tablet or mobile, the content is not stuck to the edges of the screen. Okay, so now that we have our blank content section, we'll want to go back to our Figma design and start integrating, adding the building blocks that we identified in the previous video, where we trained our eye to look at the building blocks that made up web design. In Figma, we had this big block of content, which we identified because there was some spacing above and on the side, and also the border from the navigation menu, which if you see spaces and borders, those are usually a signal that it's a different block on the page. So we had that big content block and we noticed that we could divide it into 2 columns. So let's add a columns element in WeWeb. We'll go again on our add menu and drag and drop the columns element. To be more precise, to have that precision, I'll drag and drop it inside the navigator. And here we have, we see 2 columns on our page. By default, the columns in WeWeb are divided into 12 units. So here we see that if we went here, you see it says 6 and 6. So 12 divided by 2, you have 2 columns. You could change this. By default, it's 12. It's pretty standard. So we encourage you to leave it like that unless you have a very specific design that requires you to divide your columns with a different unit count. In the columns element, you also have different presets. So by default, you have columns, but you could actually switch them into rows, make a mosaic. And in the columns, you have different formats like this, where if you select different formats, you'll have a different presets. We'll go back to 2 columns and we'll go ahead and make it 9 by 3. The reason we're doing that is if we go into our Figma design and the more precise one, if we go, for example, on this frame here, we see that the width, so this column, the width is close to 300 pixels. And if we go in this frame, so this one here, the width is about 900. So it's about that 9 and 3 proportion that we had in our columns. We could do a more precise calculation if you wanted to. We don't necessarily see the point, so we'll just go ahead and choose 9 and 3 right here. Okay, so then what we'll want to do is inside the columns element, we have 3 flex boxes here because we have 3 columns. So we can go ahead and double click and rename it column 1 and column 2. It's good practice to rename your elements right away because you'll see as we add, we're going to move faster and faster and add elements faster and faster on the page. It's good practice to name them right away. It makes it easier to find them here. Once your tree becomes busy, it's just easier. So for example, we can type in action and it will find our action container, which is actually this profile text link in our nav bar. Okay, back to our Figma design. We had the 2 columns and we broke down the different blocks inside each column. So we have header, overview, and history in column 1. Let's add 3 divs in our column 1 in WeWeb. Boom. What I'll do is I can copy paste, so pressing Command or Control C and Command or Control V, and I can just copy paste like this. So now I have 3 divs. Right away, I will rename them header, overview, and history. So by default, if we go to the styling properties of our divs, a div in WeWeb has a width of 100%. This is important because it makes it a little bit different to the container element, which we'll use in a second, that has a width of auto. In this case, for header, overview, and history, we want those blocks to take 100% of the width of the column. Because the column has the direction vertical by default, these 3 elements stack up on top of each other. And you can see there are 3 blocks. You can see that through the dotted lines. So now we have 3 blocks inside a bigger block. Back to our Figma. In our column 2, we have 2 blocks, the card block and the links block. So let's add those in WeWeb. And here what we can do is we could take the history div, and if we pressed Alt and drag and dropped it, if we're on Windows, or Option and drag and drop it on Mac, it also copies the element. And so let's rename them card, and just for fun I will change it up a bit and go and change the name here, and this will be called links. So my design is taking shape. I see that I have 3 boxes here and 2 boxes here with the dotted lines, and that's those 3 boxes here and 2 boxes here. So we're looking pretty good. Now, inside our Figma design, we can look at the spacing between columns. So what I do in Figma is I select an element, and if I go on the border or select, then move to a second element, I see that the spacing between the 2 is 20 pixels. So what I'll do in WeWeb is I will actually get rid of all the default padding that we have that comes with the columns element, and replace it by the padding that from the padding and margins from our Figma design. So here I'm going to move back to 0 because I don't want to use their padding. And I'm just going to check that on my columns. Again, I'll get the, I'll remove the padding, and same on column 2. Now we have 3 options to add the correct spacing so that the spacing between the columns we have in WeWeb matches the spacing that we have in Figma. We have 3 options, but only one is correct. Option 1 would be to add padding right on the right side of column 1 and have it at 20 pixels. The second option would be to have it on a padding left on the column 2. Again, that wouldn't, and have 20 pixels of padding left. That would not be the correct option. The recommended option is to have a padding right 10 pixels on column 1 and padding left 10 pixels on column 2. We usually recommend that to divide the spacing in two. So we recommend using numbers that are dividable by 2 for your paddings and margins. Again, there are different schools of thoughts about this. That's the way we recommend to do it because it makes it a little bit easier to maintain, to find where your paddings and margins are. And responsiveness, it's a little bit easier to track. So let's go ahead and add padding right of 10 pixels here, and on column 2 we will go ahead and add padding left of 10 pixels. Now let's move on to our header block. So this header block here, we identified that it's made up of 2 elements, 2 blocks. So let's go ahead and in this case, because we don't want this to take 100% of our header block, or this to take 100%, we will use the containers instead of divs. So back on our add panel, we'll go ahead and add 2 containers inside our header. So here we can move them around here, and again we can copy paste, and we'll say left and we'll say right. And what you see here is because we're using the container, the width is no longer 100%, it's 8, so auto. This is helpful because it will change depending on the size of the elements inside the box, or if we give it, in this case, what we'll do is we'll say that the left one, we want it to take up as much space as possible. We want it to grow as much as possible. So you see here that suddenly it took up almost everything, and this little one on the right took up no space at all. We use the width auto when we want the container's width to vary according to the children elements. The children elements are the elements that are inside of it, and we'll soon fill up the left container with children elements. And we use 100% width when we want the container to take up the entire width of its parent. For example, for a header that needs to take up the entire width of a section, so we can be sure that a child element on the right will always be on the right. The header element here, which contains 2 blocks, the left and right, what you may not have noticed is that it has a horizontal direction. We could actually make it vertical. In this case, the elements would stack up on top of each other, but we actually want to display them horizontally to match what we have in our design here. Direction is important because it will inform how you use the flexbox properties that are here. So for example, you could center everything on the right. If I remove the grow if possible setting here, you see that we have those 2 little boxes. So if we go on header and we have this direction horizontal, because it is horizontal, if we could add a gap here between columns, so that means that it adds spacing between the children elements. It doesn't add any padding or margins on the left and right. It just in between elements. We could justify to the left, so bring these to the left, or center them like they were. So they're here. We could justify right. We can do a space evenly. So that means that the space here is again seen here and is again seen here, and you have the same space here. So the elements are spaced evenly, or you can have what's called space between, and that's basically pushed to the left and right. Because we're in the direction horizontal and we're taking up 100% of the height, we won't play with the alignment just yet, but we will throughout this integration video. So don't worry about those for now. Of course, feel free to fool around with these settings. That's really how you learn. The one thing that's key to understand is that the settings that you set on the parents will apply to the children elements. So at parent level, you're deciding what the children can or cannot do, basically. Okay, for now, let's again tell the child left that it can grow as much as it wants. Moving back to our Figma, what we have is two vertical items on the left. So what we see on the left box here is we have two text elements that are vertically aligned, so on top of each other, and we'll add both text elements on our WeWeb page. So let's look for them here, text, and drag and drop them here. I'll copy paste this one. And you see here that they're next to each other. So left and right. So what we need to do is we need to go on the parent, on their parent element, and change the direction of the Flexbox container to vertical. Now they're on top of each other. Okay, so in Figma, we have call traffic and manage your team members and their account permissions here. So call traffic. Your user roles and permissions here. Okay. So team members, actually. Team members. Boom. Okay, so here in Figma, if I click on call traffic, I can see that the font is enter, the weight, so how bold the font is 500, and then it's 32 pixels size and line height is 38. So 500, 32, 38. I'm gonna go ahead and say 500, 32, and instead of auto, I will say 38. By default, the font family of blank WeWeb project is Enter, but you could change this in the settings and go into fonts and import a font directly from Google if you wanted to, or you could even just click on Manage Font here and upload another font if you wanted to. We'll leave it at Enter for now because we want our designer to be happy with us. Okay, and the text color is actually gray 900, 1818 1B. So let's do that. Let's create a color. 1818 1B. And it's gray / 500. Is that? Oh, 900. I made a mistake, so I will go ahead in here, find gray, and change it to 900. There we go. Now on here, let's go ahead and look at the settings, the properties, the CSS properties in Figma. Here we have 400, 14, 20. 400, 14, and 20. And by the way, if we wanted to, we could also save it here. Say a typography. Here we have 400, 14, 20. So we could say, subheaders, for example, and save it here. And that way, if you had other subheaders in your project, when you change it once, it would change. It would apply the change everywhere. All right, now the last thing that we want to do is add the select element that is here. So we want to add this select and add it to our right box in WeWeb. So again, let's go back to the add panel and look for the select element. We'll drag and drop it in the right box here. And wow, it's taking up a lot of room that we didn't expect. So what could be the problem here? Let's try and move the right container to vertical. Okay, it looks a little bit better because we can now see the borders, but it's still taking a bunch of space. So if we go on the input select, what we notice is that we have a fixed width right here. So by default, we style the elements a certain way. We try to use stylings that will not slow you down in your building process. That would make the element look nice on most designs. In this case, we have a very precise design, so we'll just switch it back to auto. And now, if we look at this, select, we see that the edges are very sharp, but in Figma, they're pretty round. So let's select the select in Figma and look at what this looks like. So it has a padding of, if we go here, it's 16 on the sides and 11 top and bottom. Let's check in WeWeb if that matches. So on the input select, and I make sure that I'm on the correct element here, I'll have a look at the paddings. And it looks like it should be 11 top and bottom and 16 left and right to match the Figma. Okay, and now the radius, the corner radius is 8 pixels in Figma. So let's go ahead and change that in WeWeb. Corner radius, 8 pixels. And so now we see the rounded edges here. And back on our input select, the border is E0, E0, E0. And in Figma, we have, let's see, grade 200, E4, E4, E7. So let's change that. E4, E4, E7. And in Figma, it's called grade 200. So we will call it that, grade 200. There we go. Okay, now the placeholder says this month. And the placeholder, so let's go here, actually. So on the input select and the placeholder this month. And what is the text color? The text color is 3F46. So on the placeholder text, we will change the style. So, all right, got it right. And I guess it's the same for the icon. Let's see. No, it's not. So this is gray 500, 71717A. Let's see. Seven one seven one seven A, and it's gray 500. Gray 500. Okay, but it's the wrong icon actually. I see it doesn't match exactly this one. So I will go ahead in here. I will change it, and I just happen to know it's called chevron. But you can look up icons here. Sometimes it takes a bit longer, but you'll find a bunch of different icons here. And I noticed there's there's some green padding here, so I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of those because it's messing up. I'm worried it's messing with my design. Still, I do have a 13 pixel padding here, spacing here. So 13 is not ideal. What I will do is I'll change it to 12, and I will add a little bit of padding right here. So I can have 6 on one side and 6 on the other. Let's move on to our overview block. In our overview block, we also have left and right blocks or boxes. So let's move back to WeWeb. I'll close the header here and open the overview, and I will go ahead, cancel my search, and drag and drop a container, which I will copy. So left and right. Inside those left and right containers, we see that on the left we have another 2 blocks. One block is current month, and this is a second block. We see here that it's a separate block because those 3 items go together. We can see that they belong to next to each other because there's not a lot of space between them. There's some space on the left, and then here there's a lot of space until we hit the progress bar here, and there's some space below and above, but they're pretty close to each other and go together, so we know it's a dedicated box. So let's do that. Let's add in our left container here, let's add one text. So, and then let's add another box. So let's say a div in this case. Let's try the div. And inside the div, we will have an icon. Another text element, which we can copy paste from here. Okay, this looks a little bit messy. So let's have a closer look. This is my right container, and this is my left container. So let's move back to the parent overview and push the left and right, push them right to the edges, so space between. Now, still there's a lot of space here apparently. So let's see what's happening here. If I go on the left container, I see that my alignment is centered. So let's move it, boom, to the left. Still now on my div, it seems it's not aligned. So let's again align this to the left. Now it looks a little bit better, or closer anyway to what we have here. So current month. And the color is gray 500. Okay. Now the icon is a phone. It's a blue phone that looks like this. Here, it's this one here. And the color, so let's click on it. So it's 16 by 16, and the color is blue 700, 1D4, ED8. So primary 700 is here. The size was 16. Oops, here we go, 16. And now this text is 540 and 44. Okay. And the color, gray 900. Okay. Gray 900. Right. Okay, and then it's 414.20. 414.20. 14, and 20. Okay, now this looks a little bit goofy as well. So what can we do to change that? In Figma, it looks like we see the comma here. The end of the comma is aligned to this. So it seems like those two elements are aligned to the bottom, and whereas the icon is aligned at the center of the flex box. So let's have a look at what we could do here. We could tell the div to align to the bottom. So then it's nice because two commas are in the same line. The problem we have is the icon goes, because it's also a child element of the div, it goes to the bottom as well. But we can actually override this setting, click on the icon. So select the icon, make sure that's the element that is selected in the navigator. And we can force the alignment here. And that's it. Now it looks, the alignment is the same as it is in Figma. But we have a bit of a problem with the spacing. So let's select one item and look at the spacing between there. We have 14 of padding, and between those two, we don't have any. So we will add the padding here. And what we will do is we will say padding right 7, and then padding left 7 as well. Okay, now all of this looks a little bit stuck to each other. So what can we do to avoid that? To make sure that there's some spacing here. So we have spacing at 16 padding here. On our left container, we could add a row gap of 16. So what that does is it adds a gap in between the elements, the children elements. So the text element and the div element, those are the two children elements of left. It adds a gap in between the elements, but it doesn't add any padding or margins around them. We also need to match this style, so let's do that. Border is grade 200 and 1 pixel. So, and it's on the overview actually. So let's go here. Border is 1 pixel and grade 200. There we go. We need to add some padding. So we see it's 24 left and right and top and bottom. So let's add some padding in WeWeb. Make sure we're on the correct container. So the overview, look for a padding, 24. That's starting to look nice. Okay, now here in the right element, we want to add a progress bar. So we'll go to our add menu again and look for a progress bar element. We'll drag and drop it. We want this on the page, so we'll try to drag and drop it right inside that box. There we go. And we see it's tiny. Why is it tiny? Let's have a look at the width. So the width of right says automatic, and the width of the progress bar says automatic. We actually want to force it to be a bit bigger. So in Figma, if we click on here on the progress bar, we have a fixed size of 158 width. So we'll use that. Make sure that we're on the progress bar in the navigator, and in the width, we'll go ahead pixel or 158. We'll also change the default height, so let's make it at 8 pixels to match what we have here. And we'll add a radius of 4 pixels. So 4 pixels radius would be here. Okay, it's already 4 pixels. The label here, we see the 29% is still there. What we'll do is we'll go ahead and say we don't want a label. Still, we have this 50% here on the design in Figma. So we'll add a text element to our right container. Text. And we want it to say 50%, 500, 1420. And the color is 3F46. So 3F46. Now it's a little weird because this is taking it's taking up a bunch of space. So let's have a look at our right parent container here, and we see that the alignment says it wants to stretch. It wants the children element of the right container to stretch to take up as much height as possible. And because the parent container, the overview container, is taking, this much height, because of these two containers, then we need to change this. So how is it aligned? It looks like it's aligned. There's this kind of baseline here. So we will match it here. So now this looks pretty close to what we have here. What we notice though is that even though here we have a corner radius of 4 on our progress bar, which matches the corner radius that we have in our Figma design on the progress bar, which we can see here. If we notice that the edges are still square in WeWeb. So what could that be? Let's go on our progress bar here and look at the overflow option and set it to auto. Now we see that it's nice and the corners are nice and rounded. On the progress bar, let's go ahead and make sure it matches the 50%. We did our overview section. Now let's have a look at our history container. So we have a header, filters, and a table. Let's add that to WeWeb. In my history container here, I will want to add a header. So let's go ahead and add some text. Header. I also have a div because I wanted to take up the entire width of my history box. So I'm selecting a div to have the 100% width, and I'll call that filters. And then I have a table. So I will go ahead and look for a table and move it here. Actually, I want my filters to go above the table. So the first thing I'll do is I'll go ahead and align everything to the left. I will change this to history and style it. Boom. 24 and 32. Great. 900. There we go. Now maybe on my history here, I can use the row gap. Let's see how much spacing I have in Figma. I have, if I'm here, if I select history and move here, I have 16. And if I'm on monthly here and go here, same thing. So I have 16 pixels of spacing between my filters and the table and between my history header and the filters. So let's go ahead and use the row gaps. I will go ahead and say 16, and that way I have a nice even spacing between the three elements. And most importantly, if I added a fourth or fifth or sixth, I would always have that nice even spacing. I wouldn't have to go and make sure that the padding is correct at element level. Okay, so here I have, again, it looks like I have one box here left and one box here right. So let's do this. Container, because I don't want them to take 100% of the width. Double click and right. There we go. We have two select elements on the left and a button on the right. Let's first go to the filters, to the parent, and do that space between setting that we talked about earlier. Boom. That way I have my left container on the left and the right container on the right. So I had two select elements. What I will do is I will take this one. I will put my input select here, and I'll click on Option. On Windows, it would be Alt, and drag and drop it here to copy it. That way you see it's still there, but it's also here. And here I'll just do a simple copy paste with Command C, Command V. That way they're styled already, which saves me a bit of time. Monthly and current month. So on my input select, go to the settings. My placeholder is monthly, and here it's current month. Now between the two selects, I could use a column gap, because in this case, the direction is horizontal, so there are two columns. In Figma, we'll go ahead and check. The spacing is 8 pixels. So I will add that here. And the reason I'm adding a columns gap and not padding is, again, because I might be tempted to add filters in the future. So if I added a third select, the styling, the spacing would already be dealt with this column gap. Okay, now I need to add a button here to download the report. Let's go ahead and look for buttons. Look me, I'm a button. So here we go. I will drag and drop it here. It's big and blue, which doesn't match my style at all. So download report, and it has an icon. So let's add download report first. Download report. And let's add an icon on the left. Now this icon, I want to change. I want it to be a download. So it looks like this. I think. Let's see if I have looks like this, right? Yes, that looks right. So let's look at the color. It's gray 500. Let's go and look for this. Gray 500 is here. All right, and the text font, the text color here. Okay, the background color is actually transparent, or is it not? No, it's white. So let's go and add the button background color is white. So the text size is 500, 1420. So 500, 14, and 20. All right. And the spacing here is 11. I believe. Okay. In between here, so it's 16 on the sides and 11 at the top. So let's look at what we have here. 16 and 11. Yes. So let's add the 11 here. It's a little bit unconventional, but we'll do it that way to match our design. Okay, now on this button, I want a radius of 8 pixels. 8 pixels. In here, it's the borders are gray 200. 1 and all right, that looks quite nice. I'm wondering if have I styled this 500. No, I T. Does that mean that I forgot to style this? Probably, since I copy pasted it. Yes. So let's go ahead and fix that. 14. And that's part of the integration phase. There are things that you will forget, and little by little you will improve them and get better. And okay, we're looking pretty good. Let's just have a look at these. The input selects have a width of auto, which is fine by us because we see in the Figma that here we see that the select is smaller because monthly takes up less space than current month. So the width auto in WeWeb is correct. Now let's move on to the table. Okay, to work with a table element, let me first show you what it looks like when we drag and drop it. So we have the header here, and we have a collection list. The collection list is because usually with tables, what you want to do is you want to display data from a data collection. We covered data in how to get data and external data into WeWeb in separate videos, and we cover how to display it on the page in separate videos. So we won't focus on that for now. But the headers are made. You have 6 different flex boxes for each column. In our Figma design, we only have 4 columns, so we're just going to go ahead right away and delete. So we make sure that we're on a flex box in the navigator, and we just press delete on our keyboard, and that's it. So now we have 4 columns in our headers, but you see that in our collection list, we still have 6 items there. So in our collection list, we have 4 lines. We actually will only need 1. This is because, and we'll see it later in the course when we display data, this line will be repeated as many times as there are items in our collection. So we only need 1 line, and then inside that line, again, we have 6 flex boxes because that's the default that we have with the table, but we only need 4, so we're gonna delete those 2. So now we have a nice clean table with 4 columns like we have in our Figma. The first thing we'll do is we will change the names of headers. So event, minutes, type, and date. Events, minutes, and date. And you see that all of this is uppercase. So what I could do actually pressing clicking while I'm pressing Command on Mac or Control on Windows. If I multi-select them and change the character case to none, then there's no specific casing. It's just what I typed in. So I typed in the capital letters. So event, minutes, type, and date. Next to minutes, there's actually a small icon. So let's add it. Icon. We'll go ahead and drag and drop it here. Maybe it will be easier. Okay. And we see that it goes below minutes. That's because minutes is taking up all taking up all of the space in the flex box. So let's go ahead and see if we can change that. If we move the direction of the parent flex box to horizontal, suddenly the two children elements will be next to each other. And then we can also justify this to the left so that minutes gets back to the left. In our Figma, the icon is 9.33 pixels. So let's say 10. You grab the icon here and change it to 10 pixels. And I will also change the style. So event is 512, 12, and 18. Let me multi-select again. So grab all the text. So I only have to do it once. The only difference is here. The line height is 18. All right, and the color is 525B. 525B. Okay, perfect. And in Figma, if I go here and check this, all right, the spacing is very strange. It's 7.33, so let's say 8. We will add a little padding of 4 here and a little padding of 4 there. Okay, and we have a background color. Background colors we'll handle later when we have bound our data and we want to do that alternate color. For now, we'll leave the table color as is. Still, we want to add the borders. So these borders here, we want to add them. So let's add them at table level. And what are the settings? So if we go here, we have 1 pixel, gray 300. So let's do this. Pixel, gray 300. Let's see. Do not have it. So D4, D4, D8. Let's create it. Gray 300. There we go. Okay, and for the corner radius, we will need a corner radius. So for the table, yes, let's go with corner radius 8, so to match the rest of our design. And I'm not sure if you can see, but here, because we added the corner radius on the table element, but not on the child header element, the header element kind of sticks out a little bit of the table. So what we need to do is we need to make sure we go on the header. And what we can do is add some top left and top right corner radius. And then again on the header, we'll change the overflow to auto. And then suddenly it looks nice and smooth. The corners are nice and smooth. And that's it. That looks pretty good. As I mentioned before, we will style the colors of the table later on when we add data and we want to alternate the style of the background color of the different lines. This looks kind of okay, except that if we make all of this small again, the items that we have in column 1 here, the header, overview, and history, they're all kind of stuck next, well, not next to each other, but on top of each other with no spacing. So if we go back to our Figma, let's select this one and see how much space there is between the two blocks. We have 24 here, and here we have 32. So, well, I guess we'll follow exactly our Figma design, and we will add margin top of 12, a margin bottom of 12, and a margin bottom of 16, and a margin top of 16. So we have 24 here and 32 here. And in this case, we use margins because we want to create breathing room between elements. So it's not like kind of padding, which is breathing room inside an element. It's breathing room outside, pushing other elements away. Okay, the only thing that's still a little bit weird is that we don't have any space, breathing room here between the nav bar and our call traffic. So if we go into Figma, if we select this, we see there's a 48 pixel breathing room. So that would be a padding, which we're gonna add here. So we'll transform this like this and add 48 pixels of padding top. Now we're ready to move on to column 2. In column 2, we have a div with the card, and then we have a div with links. So as a reminder, the card is this block, and we decided it was one big block because there's a border and then the spacing in between, and then we considered these two were the same and part of a links block. So in the card container, we're going to add an image and a div that people will be able to click on. So the see offers here. Let's add the image. Here we go. And a div. And the div, people will be able to click on it. So we'll add a workflow so that on click, people can change page, for example, and we'll redirect to another page. We don't have a click element. We just let you add a workflow to any element that you like. So in this case, it will be a div. And inside the div, we'll rename it link. Inside the div, we'll add a text element and a little icon here. So let's add text element. And also an icon. Here we go. Now, maybe to see clearer, what we'll do is that on our card element, we will add right away the border and the corner radius. So let's select not the image, but the blog post card. And we have a border, which you can see here, 1 pixel, gray 200. So let's add it here. 1 pixel, gray 200. So 1 pixel, and then 200. I must have done something with my mouse because it's only 1 pixel. Here we go. And the corner radius must be 8 pixels, yes. 8 pixels. There we go. And by doing that, we notice that the image has a width. It's not taking up all the space. So let's change that. Put it to auto so that it fills up the entire block here. And so what you might see, maybe it's not very clear on the video here, but if you try to follow along, you will see it on your computer. Here, the image sticks out a little bit of the container now that we've added the corner radiuses. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that on the card, we set the overflow to hidden. That way, the children elements of the card would not overflow, will not spill out of the container. And now you see it's much smoother. We have nice rounded edges here. All right, back to our link. We see here that the icon and the text are far apart, and we also see that we have padding of 16 and 24. So let's add this. Here on our link card, we want to first do kind of a space between, and then we want to make sure that we had the padding that we talked about. So 16 and 24. Is that right? Yes, that is right. So the C offers is 516.24. And gray 900. There we go. And this icon here is, I think, this one. And let's see what the size is. It's 6 by 10, so let's say, let's have it at 10. And the color is gray 500s. And by the way, you're authorized to doubt your designer and change if you want to, but I like to trust my designers because I'm not very good at design myself. Okay, so for the image, what we want to do is we want to click on the image and go to export, and then export that image. And now we have it in our downloads, so we can import it inside WeWeb. Back inside WeWeb, we'll go to our image, and here what we'll do is we will go ahead and upload a new image. So we have it here. Let's upload it. We could resize it if we wanted to. We don't need to in this case, so we'll just upload it. And there we go. Now we have one block left. Let's have a look at it. We have this block here with two links. Let's just select the link, and I'm pressing on Option and drag and dropping it. I'm on Mac. If you're on a Windows, it would be Alt and drag and drop, and then Command C, Command V, or Control C, Control V to copy paste them. So we're using that same link that we had here. Now, what we'll want to do is we we'll want to make sure that we have this little spacing here. So we have 4 and then we have 4 here. So in this case, we only have 2 blocks. So we have a couple of options. I think what I will do is I will use the column here and just do a row gap of 4. I like it. It's nice and clean. Let's see. Yeah, here you go. You see it added a 4 pixels of spacing. And here what I will do in my links is I will use the same trick of rows. It's even more useful in this case. I mean, for this one, for the space between the card and the links, I could have used just a padding. I just really like this setting. And here for the links section, it really makes sense. It makes even more sense to use the row gap because again, if I was adding a bunch of links, I wouldn't have to add padding anywhere. It would be there by default. So it's nice setting, nice property to use. Now the text, contact support and report an incident. Contact support and report an incident. I need my borders. So my borders are a little bit, my borders were on the card here. So I'll need to add my borders here on the link elements. And let me select both so I only do it once. So the border is 1 pixel. I need to go back to inspect. So here, inspect instead of export where I was. Corner radius is 8 and we have gray 200 as a border. So corner radius 8. And this is grade 200. So let's go ahead. Grade 200. Let's see. 16 and 24. These are the same as before. So that's it. We're pretty much good to go. Let's see what that looks like. Do we like it? I think it looks nice. Oh, it looks like we have some unintended thing here. Let's go ahead and maybe it's cover. Let's go ahead and see what that looks like. Do we have some padding in here that I didn't think to get rid of? We don't have any padding on the sides. So let's see, would that be? There we go. There we have it. Now the image is taking up all of the space. And there we go. We've got our Figma design in WeWeb. Oh, no. I see. Again, this is part of the design. So I've got 20 here. Okay, it looks smaller here. Let's see if I did it correctly. So column 2. No, I don't have my padding. I guess I got rid of it by mistake. And let's see if in column 1 I have my padding. Okay. So let's go. It's always nice to check because sometimes with your mouse or something, if you have a mouse that scrolls it, you can move some settings around. All right, it's looking pretty good. If we compare to our Figma, if we go into preview mode in WeWeb, so our little preview mode here, and we look at our design, it looks nice, it looks clean. And similar to what we have in Figma, though in Figma our screen is smaller. So let's make our screen a little bit smaller in WeWeb. Maybe and we'll take care of responsive later, don't worry. All right, that looks very, very clean. I think it's a good start. Now we can add data to display. We can start playing around with the filters and make sure that our design is responsive. All of that in the coming videos.